In the public sector, what does it exactly mean to be a public manager, and how is that different from being a leader? On a variety of different subjects, we can actually compare management and leadership to determine what some of those differences are. As far as decision-making goes, managers make decisions. Leaders facilitate decisions. In other words, they lead the implementation of the decision. As far as vision, managers generally tend to have a very short-term vision. They see things in terms of today. Leaders, however, have a very long-term strategic vision. They're always looking toward tomorrow, making plans for the future. As far as control, how do managers and leaders compare in terms of control? Managers lead by formal influence. In other words, they are in a position, they have a title that identifies them as a manager. Leaders, however, lead by their own personal characteristics, by their own charm, their personality, their ability to inspire others. In terms of when they take action, there are differences between managers and leaders. Managers are reactive. Something happens, they react. Leaders, on the other hand, are proactive. They see something happening ahead of time. They plan for it and they're prepared to deal with it. Sometimes they can even stop it before it happens. Where there are rules involved, managers make the rules, leaders break them. Leaders are very situational. They handle a situation based on how they think it needs to be handled at the moment, even if that means breaking a rule. And as far as their primary concern goes, managers are most interested in doing things right. Leaders are much more interested in doing the right thing. So there are very significant differences between managers and leaders, and it's important in the public sector that we recognize those. Another very important question that comes up is what citizens can do in terms of improving governance. And I think this is very important for Ukraine to consider because it recognizes that things are different. Citizens now have a very different obligation than they remember from history that they had. Two things are very critically important. The first of all is citizen participation. Participation implies that the involvement of citizens in a wide range of policymaking activities, including the determination of levels of service, budget priorities, and the acceptability of physical construction projects and a number of other things that government engages in, are very important. And citizens need to be involved in the decisions surrounding those things. Secondly, citizen engagement. It's not enough to simply participate. You must be engaged as well as citizens. This implies that the involvement of citizens in decision-making processes of the state are so important that they need to do that in order to influence public policies and programs, ensuring a more positive impact for themselves. In other words, they need to participate in decision-making for the purpose of getting better decisions for them. There are 5 simple principles, really, that sort of underlie ethical behavior among public officials. And I'd like to quickly refer to those. First of all, it's very important that they obey the law. Public officials are not above the law. In no democracy in the world does the Constitution say public officials are exempt from the law. So that's the first important point. Secondly, public officials, in order to behave ethically, must serve the public interest. It's not about personal interest. It's not about their own selves. It's not about their own salary or their own advantages. It's about serving the public interest. Third, they need to avoid doing harm. Sometimes when public officials make policy, it will benefit some people and hurt others. But the reality is the best we can hope to do is create policies and provide services that will benefit the most people while doing the least harm to the fewest people. That's the goal. Government officials also need to take individual responsibility for the processes they are involved in and for the consequences of those processes. They need to own their decisions. Once they decide something, it's theirs, and they need to take accountability for it. And finally, government officials need to treat incompetence as an abuse of office. It's something that absolutely should not be acceptable. So incompetence is something that should not be tolerated. Now, in addition to those simple principles about ethical behavior, I also want to quickly discuss some principles to guide discretion. Public officials have an enormous amount of discretion. In other words, they can make decisions on their own. And in so doing, we need to be careful that they adhere to the principles of ethics in those decisions. So here are 5 sort of guidelines for how to make ethical decisions. First of all, if you exercise discretion, which is a very normal thing for public officials to do, you should serve the public interest in doing that. Secondly, public officials should push back the bounds on rationality so that they can actually deliberate. They need to be able to discuss and talk about the decisions they need to make. They're not always rational. Public officials should be truthful in everything that they do. They should demonstrate procedural respect. If you have procedures in place, you should adhere to them. And finally, they should exercise restraints on how they go about accomplishing their organizational ends. In other words, to reach the goals they want to reach. They need to be careful how they do that. Today in Ukraine, there are a lot of people who are concerned with what kind of employment they will look for in the future, particularly the young people in Ukraine. And some of them might be considering the public sector and wondering if this is the place where they really want to work. In talking to a group of students who were graduating from a certificate program with the City Council here in Lviv a few days ago, I ended my speech with this next passage. It's in the form of 3 questions, which I also answered for those young people. The first question is, what kind of future does Ukraine have to look forward to? And I answer that by saying that the American President Abraham Lincoln once said, "The best way to predict your future is to create it." No one knows what really lies ahead for Ukraine. But that doesn't mean it is not outside the control of the young people in Ukraine. And to those young people, I would say, roll up your sleeves and create the future you want. The second question I hear these young people ask is, but how can I change things? To that I would say, according to Buckminster Fuller, who's an American architect and theorist and author and inventor, he said, you never change things by fighting the existing reality. To change something, build a new model that makes the existing model obsolete. And I add to that, stop blaming the past for the inertia of the present. Roll up your sleeves and create the future you want. And the final question that I hear young people ask is, but we have already tried to change and failed. Why try again? The answer here is, Noam Chomsky, who's an American philosopher and political commentator, advised that optimism is a strategy for making a better future. Because unless you believe that the future can be better, you are unlikely to step up and take responsibility for making it so. So again, I say the future belongs to those who have the courage to dream of it. Roll up your sleeves and create the future you want.